The heat didn't wake me. It was the sickeningly sweet scent of gasoline soaking into the antique pine floorboards. When I grabbed the brass doorknob, it seared my palm. It wouldn't budge. Outside, an engine revved. My son-in-law was driving away, leaving me to burn with my $5 billion empire. There is a specific kind of silence that surrounds a woman who is worth $5 billion. It is the silence of people holding their breath, waiting for a piece of the pie. My name is Margaret Sterling. For 32 years, my husband, Richard, and I built Sterling Hawthorne Medical Technologies from a tiny rented laboratory in Seattle into a global titan in surgical robotics. When Richard passed away from pancreatic cancer 4 years ago, I didn't just lose the love of my life. I became the sole trustee of an empire. The buyout offer from a multinational conglomerate closed 6 months after his funeral. Liquidating our shares left the Sterling Family Trust with exactly $5.2 billion. I was 61, grieving, and suddenly holding the GDP of a small island nation in my bank accounts. But my primary concern wasn't the money. It was my daughter, Chloe. Chloe was 28 at the time, sweet, sheltered, and chronically naive. Richard and I had tried to give her a normal childhood. But it's impossible to be normal when your father's face is on the cover of Forbes. Chloe had a habit of falling for wounded birds, men who needed fixing or funding. I had spent my life protecting her from gold diggers, but I was looking for men with holes in their shoes and empty bank accounts. I wasn't prepared for Simon Caldwell. Simon didn't look like a predator. He looked like an heir. He was introduced to Chloe at a charity gala in San Francisco. He was a junior partner at a boutique wealth management firm, impeccably dressed in custom Brioni suits, with a jawline that belonged on a billboard and a pedigree that seemed flawless. He spoke of his family estate in Connecticut and summers in Martha's Vineyard. He drove a vintage Porsche, knew exactly which wine to order, and looked at my daughter like she was the only woman in the room. Within 6 months, they were engaged. From the beginning, my instincts screamed that something was wrong. It wasn't anything overt, it was the micro-expressions. The way his eyes darted around our sprawling Bellevue estate, calculating the square footage. The way he subtly steered conversations toward the structure of the Sterling Trust. I hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named David Reyes. What David found was troubling, but not technically illegal. Simon's family estate had been heavily mortgaged and lost to foreclosure a decade ago. His father had died in debt. Simon was entirely self-made, clawing his way into high society through sheer charisma and carefully managed credit card debt. When I presented this to Chloe, she wept, but not for the reasons I hoped. She accused me of being a paranoid, controlling widow who couldn't stand to see her happy. "He told me all of this, Mom," she cried, standing in my study. "He was ashamed. He didn't want you to think he wasn't good enough for me. You just hate that you can't control him like you control everything else." I backed down. I gave them my blessing. I paid for a $3 million wedding in Lake Como, but I did not budge on the prenuptial agreement. Noah Parker, my ruthless 80-year-old bulldog of an attorney, drafted an ironclad document. Simon would get a generous allowance, but he would never have a controlling stake in the trust. If they divorced, he walked away with a flat 5 million pennies compared to the whole. Simon signed it with a dazzling smile. "I'd sign it if it gave me $1, Margaret," he told me, pouring me a glass of champagne. "I just want your daughter." For the first 2 years of their marriage, he played the perfect husband. He quit his firm to help manage the family philanthropic foundation. That was my first mistake, letting him near the books. By the 3rd year, I started noticing discrepancies. Small things at first. Inflated invoices for charity events. Grants directed to newly formed shell charities in the Cayman Islands. When I confronted him, he had an arsenal of spreadsheets and smooth explanations, brushing them off as accounting errors by his subordinates. The tension between us became a silent, cold war. Chloe was oblivious, pregnant with my first grandchild, blissfully decorating a nursery in the $12 million Pacific Heights mansion I had bought them. Then came November, the month that changed everything. Simon called me on a Tuesday, his voice laced with an uncharacteristic urgency. "Margaret, we need to talk. The IRS is auditing the foundation, and there's a massive vulnerability in how Noah structured the office. If we don't restructure the trust before the fiscal year ends, the penalties will strip us of hundreds of millions. I told him I would have Noah look into it. Noah is the one who made the mistake, Simon countered smoothly. I have a team of tax attorneys in Denver on standby. Chloe and I are heading up to the Aspen cabin this weekend to get out of the city smog. Fly out. We'll keep it strictly family, look over the new proposals by the fire, and have a quiet weekend. Please, Margaret. For the baby's sake. We need to protect the legacy. Against every instinct I possessed, I agreed. I packed a small bag, kissed my golden retriever goodbye, and boarded my private jet to Colorado. I didn't know I was flying into my own grave. Our family cabin, Whispering Pines, sits on 40 acres of remote, heavily wooded land near the Roaring Fork Valley, an hour's drive from Aspen proper. Richard built it as a fortress of solitude. It was constructed from massive, raw timber logs, featuring an off-grid solar setup, satellite internet, and a sprawling ground-floor master suite with heavy oak doors. It was beautiful, but isolated. If you screamed out there, only the elk would hear you. When I arrived on Friday evening, a heavy snowstorm was already moving in, blanketing the winding mountain roads in thick, treacherous powder. Simon's black Range Rover was parked in the driveway. Inside, a fire was roaring in the massive stone hearth. Chloe looked exhausted but radiant, rubbing her swollen belly. Simon was the picture of the dutiful host, taking my coat, offering me a hot toddy, and keeping the conversation light. But beneath his warm smile, his eyes were flat, like two dark stones. After dinner, Chloe excused herself, claiming pregnancy fatigue. "I'm going to take a bath and head to bed," she said, kissing my cheek. "Don't you two stay up too late arguing over numbers." Once we heard the heavy thud of the upstairs guest room door closing, the atmosphere in the living room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Simon didn't pull out tax documents. Instead, he pulled a single, thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. "Let's skip the dance, Margaret," he said, his voice shedding its usual melodic warmth. He dropped the folder onto the reclaimed wood coffee table between us. "This is a comprehensive power of attorney and a restructuring of the trust. It names me as the primary executor and co-trustee, effective immediately." I didn't even lean forward to look at it. I took a sip of my sparkling water. "You must be out of your mind, Simon. I am in perfect health, and I am not handing you the keys to a $5 billion vault so you can funnel it into your Cayman Island shell games." He smiled, but it was a terrifying, hollow thing. "You're 65, Margaret. You have high blood pressure. And you're currently snowed in at an off-grid cabin. Anything could happen. A stroke, a fall. The stress of managing the foundation is clearly getting to you. Are you threatening me in my own home?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. I reached into my pocket for my phone. It was gone. I remembered leaving it on the kitchen counter when I arrived. I glanced over. The counter was bare. "I'm giving you a choice," Simon said, stepping closer. He pulled a heavy silver Mont Blanc pen from his breast pocket and laid it on top of the folder. "Sign the papers. You can retire to a beach in Carmel. You'll never have to worry about the business again. And Chloe gets to keep her husband. If you think I'll let a grifter like you steal my husband's legacy, you vastly underestimate me." I stood up, my knees trembling just a fraction, though I forced my posture to remain rigid. "I'm going to my room. Tomorrow morning I am calling Noah, and I am calling the SEC. We are done here, Simon. Pack your things." I turned my back on him, a foolish, arrogant mistake, and walked down the long hallway to the master suite. I fully expected him to grab me, to strike me, but he didn't. He just watched me go. I entered my bedroom and slammed the heavy oak door behind me. I immediately reached for the brass deadbolt to lock it from the inside. Before I could throw the latch, I heard a sharp metallic clack from the hallway. I jiggled the handle. It wouldn't turn. The master suite had a custom locking mechanism Richard had installed, a heavy-duty deadbolt that could be keyed from the outside to secure the room when the cabin was empty. Simon had locked me in. "Simon!" I shouted, pounding my fists against the 2-inch thick solid oak. "Open this door immediately!" Silence. I ran to the windows. The master suite was on the ground floor, but Richard, ever security conscious, had installed reinforced, shatterproof glass. Outside, the blizzard was howling, laying down inches of snow by the minute. I grabbed a heavy brass lamp from the bedside table and swung it at the window with all my might. The glass didn't even spiderweb. The lamp just bounced off, sending a jolt of pain up my arm. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at my chest. I rushed back to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. I could hear muffled footsteps moving rapidly across the hardwood floors of the main living area. Then, the heavy front door opened and closed. For a moment, I thought he had just left me locked in to teach me a lesson, to break my spirit over the weekend. Then, I smelled it. It didn't start as smoke. It started as the harsh, chemical sting of accelerant. Gasoline. It was seeping under the crack of the bedroom door, pooling onto the edge of my expensive Persian rug. "Simon!" I screamed, my voice cracking, kicking the door brutally. "Chloe! Chloe, wake up!" Through the thick walls, I heard the distinctive, throaty roar of the Range Rover's engine coming to life outside. I scrambled to the reinforced window again, pressing my face against the cold glass, peering through the driving snow. The Range Rover's headlights cut through the blizzard. Through the passenger side window, illuminated by the dashboard lights, I saw a silhouette. It was Chloe. She was sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. Simon climbed into the driver's side. "She knows." The horrifying thought crashed over me like a tidal wave. He didn't leave her upstairs. She's in the car. She knows what he's doing. I watched, paralyzed by a betrayal deeper than the fear of death, as the SUV's taillights disappeared down the snowy driveway. Seconds later, a soft whoosh echoed from the hallway, followed immediately by the hungry, crackling roar of flames. The gasoline had ignited. Smoke, thick and black, began to violently curl beneath the gap of my bedroom door. The heat radiated instantly, turning the oak paneling into an oven door. I was trapped in a reinforced box, miles from civilization, while $5 billion burned to ash. But Simon Caldwell didn't know everything about Whispering Pines. He didn't know about Richard's paranoia. And he didn't know that Margaret Sterling was not ready to die. The smoke was no longer just a smell. It was a physical entity. A thick, suffocating blanket that tasted like battery acid and burning plastic. It rolled over the ceiling and banked downward, forcing me to drop to my hands and knees. The heat in the room was escalating exponentially. The oak door was beginning to blister, the varnish bubbling and popping like boiling sugar. I coughed, a violent tearing sound, as my eyes streamed with tears. My mind raced, fragmented by panic. I had minutes, perhaps seconds, before the flashover ignited everything in the room, including the oxygen I was breathing. But Simon Caldwell, in all his meticulous, greedy planning, had made one fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated the paranoia of my late husband, Richard. Richard grew up poor, and accumulating wealth had given him a profound fear of losing it, or worse, losing his life because of it. When he built Whispering Pines, he didn't just build a cabin, he built a fortress. I crawled frantically across the Persian rug, the wool already singing beneath my palms, toward the massive walk-in closet at the back of the master suite. The closet was pitch black, the power having already failed. I felt my way to the back wall, pushing aside heavy winter coats that were beginning to smell of smoke. My hands, trembling uncontrollably, scraped across the cedar floorboards until my fingernails caught the edge of a flush steel pull ring hidden beneath a false plank. It was a subterranean fire-safe room, originally designed to protect our most valuable documents and serve as a panic room in case of a home invasion. It had a secondary ventilation system that drew air from a concealed pipe 50 yards away in the forest. I gripped the ring with both hands and pulled. Adrenaline surged through my 65-year-old veins, granting me the strength to heave the heavy, concrete-reinforced steel door upward. Just as I slid my legs into the dark, freezing shaft, the bedroom window behind me shattered inward. The sudden influx of oxygen fed the beast. A wall of orange flame roared into the room, licking at the ceiling. I threw myself down the concrete steps, pulling the heavy steel door shut above me. I spun the locking wheel, sealing the airtight gasket just as I heard the deafening crash of the bedroom ceiling caving in. The silence that followed was absolute. I was sitting in pitch blackness, surrounded by cold concrete walls, gasping for the clean, freezing air pumping through the manual vent. Above me, I could hear the faint, muffled rumble of my $5 billion empire's favorite retreat being reduced to cinders. The heat radiating through the top of the steel hatch was terrifying, but the seal held. I sat in the dark for what felt like an eternity. I had no phone, no light, no concept of time. I huddled on the concrete floor, shivering violently as the adrenaline wore off and the shock set in. I thought about Chloe's silhouette in the passenger seat. The betrayal carved a hollow ache into my chest that hurt worse than my smoke-scorched lungs. It must have been 10 or 12 hours before the rumbling above me finally ceased, replaced by the faint sound of dripping water and the howling wind. I waited another 2 hours to be certain the structure had completely cooled. Pushing the hatch open was the hardest physical task of my life. It was buried under a foot of charred timber and wet ash. I had to press my back against the cold steel and use my legs, leg pressing the heavy debris until the hatch finally groaned open, spilling gray sludge and snow onto my face. I climbed out of the grave my son-in-law had dug for me. Whispering Pines was gone. In its place was a smoking, blackened crater of stone and charred logs, hissed at by the heavy, falling snow. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a blindingly bright, freezing Sunday morning. I was wearing nothing but a cashmere sweater, slacks, and a pair of indoor loafers. I was 30 miles from the nearest town, and the temperature was in the single digits. Survival instinct, cold and calculating, took over. I found a piece of unburnt canvas tarp near the ruined garage, wrapped it around my shoulders, and began the brutal hike down the winding mountain road. I didn't feel the frostbite biting into my toes or the agonizing burn in my chest. I only felt rage. A pure, crystallized fury. 2 hours later, a Pitkin County snowplow rumbling up the pass found me. The driver, a burly man named Wyatt, nearly ran me over as I stumbled into the middle of the road. He rushed me into the heated cab, radioing for an ambulance. "Ma'am, hold on," he kept saying, turning the heater to maximum. "We've got medics waiting in Glenwood Springs. You're going to be okay." "No police," I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel. I gripped his jacket with ash-stained fingers. "No police, no registry. Tell them I am a Jane Doe." Wyatt looked at me like I was insane, but my grip was unrelenting. "Please," I begged. "If he knows I'm alive, he will finish the job." I woke up 24 hours later in a secure, private room at a small clinic in Glenwood. The local physician, Dr. Eris Mitchell, had honored my bizarre request for anonymity after I wired his clinic $100,000 from a hidden offshore emergency account Richard had set up years ago. The first call I made from the burner phone Dr. Mitchell provided was to David Reyes, my private investigator in Seattle. "Margaret?" David's voice crackled through the line, heavy with disbelief. "Margaret, the news. They're searching the ashes of the Aspen cabin right now. They found human remains. Simon is on television saying you perished in a tragic electrical fire. The remains are a dead elk that wandered into the basement over the winter. David," I croaked, "I need you in Colorado, tonight. Bring your secure laptops. The world needs to think I am dead for just a little longer. We have work to do." David Reyes arrived at the Glenwood Clinic at 3 in the morning, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. He brought everything I asked for: burner phones, encrypted laptops, and a dossier of everything happening in Seattle since the fire. We set up a command center in the clinic's small conference room. My hands were bandaged from second-degree burns, and I required an oxygen cannula, but my mind had never been sharper. "Show me," I demanded, pointing to his laptop screen. David queued up the local news broadcasts. There was Simon Caldwell, standing outside the gates of my Bellevue estate, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. He looked devastated. He was crying, actually shedding real tears, as he spoke to the press. Margaret was not just my mother-in-law. She was a titan of industry and the matriarch of our family. Simon lied flawlessly to the cameras. Her loss is an unimaginable tragedy. Chloe is completely inconsolable and currently under medical sedation. We ask for privacy during this devastating time. He moves fast, David muttered, handing me a stack of legal documents. Within 12 hours of the fire being reported, his lawyers filed emergency motions with the probate court in King County. He presented a newly minted power of attorney and a revised trust doctrine allegedly signed by you on Friday night, naming him sole executor and emergency trustee. Noah Parker didn't block it? I asked, my blood boiling. Noah tried, David replied, pulling up an email. But the signature on the document is a perfect forgery, Margaret. It's authenticated by a notary who is conveniently on Simon's payroll. Until a formal investigation proves otherwise, the court granted him temporary control of the Sterling Foundation to prevent market destabilization. He's already initiated wire transfers moving millions into his Cayman shells. He's looting the house before the body is cold, I said softly. I looked at the screen, at the image of the Bellevue gates. You said Chloe was under sedation? David hesitated. Yes. She was admitted to a private psychiatric facility in Seattle for severe shock and grief. Simon holds her medical proxy. No one can get to her. A wave of nausea washed over me, different from the smoke inhalation, the silhouette in the car, the unmoving posture. It hadn't been compliance I saw in the blizzard. It had been incapacitation. He drugged her, I whispered, the final puzzle piece snapping into place. She wasn't awake when he left me to burn. He put her out so she wouldn't try to stop him, and now he has her locked up so she can't ask questions. My mission instantly pivoted. This was no longer just about protecting my husband's legacy or exacting revenge. This was a rescue operation. I had to save my daughter from a monster. We need proof, Margaret, David said gently. The fire inspector in Aspen is classifying the blaze as undetermined due to the total destruction of the property. Arson is suspected, but the accelerant burned too hot to leave conclusive chemical traces in the snowmelt. Your word against his forged documents won't be enough to put him away before he drains the accounts and flees. He doesn't know about the eyes, I said, a grim smile touching my cracked lips. The eyes? Richard didn't trust anyone, David. You know that. Whispering Pines was fully off the grid, but Richard installed a state-of-the-art, covert closed-circuit surveillance system. The cameras were microscopic, built into the smoke detectors, the thermostat housing, and the exterior floodlights. David leaned forward, his eyes widening, but the cabin burned to the ground. The hard drives would be melted slag. There were no hard drives at the cabin, I corrected him. Richard had a dedicated satellite uplink on the roof. It recorded everything and uploaded it in real time to a secure server farm we own in a bunker outside Seattle. Simon thought he was burning the evidence, but he was just live-streaming his own felony. David's fingers flew across his keyboard. I need the server IP, the encryption key, and Richard's administrative passcode. It took us 3 hours to bypass the firewalls Richard had constructed. At 6:45 a.m., as the sun broke over the Colorado mountains, a folder labeled Whispering Pines Node appeared on David's screen. We opened the files from Friday night. The footage was staggering in its high-definition clarity. We watched from the living room camera angle as Simon handed me the folder. The audio picked up his cold, dead voice threatening me. You can retire to a beach in Carmel, and Chloe gets to keep her husband. We watched the hallway camera. We saw me retreat into the master suite and slam the door. And then we watched the devil at work. Simon calmly walked to the mudroom and retrieved a 5-gallon red jerry can of gasoline. He walked down the hall, his face a mask of absolute calm, and poured the fuel beneath the gap in my bedroom door. We watched him pull the specialized key from his pocket, slide it into the deadbolt on the outside of the door, and turn it. A clear, audible click echoed from the laptop speakers. Got him, David breathed, his fists clenched. We have him dead to rights. Keep watching, I commanded. I need to see the driveway. David switched to the exterior camera. The blizzard obscured the edges of the frame, but the Range Rover was clearly visible. We watched Simon carry a limp, unconscious Chloe out of the front door, her arms dangling lifelessly at her sides. He practically threw her into the passenger seat, buckling her in like a piece of luggage. He walked back to the cabin, tossed a match into the hallway, and calmly walked out as the orange glow erupted behind him. Tears finally spilled hot down my cheeks. My beautiful, foolish girl. She was innocent. Download it all, I told David, wiping my face with my bandaged hands, formatted into a presentation, unbreakable. We go to the FBI? David asked, inserting a secure flash drive. Eventually, I replied, standing up. My body ached, but I felt invincible. But first, we wait. Simon thinks he has won. He thinks he is a king. Let him sit on the throne for a few days. Let him gather his court. I pulled a legal pad toward me and began writing. Contact Noah Parker. Use the secure channel. Tell him Margaret Sterling is calling in her chips. Simon is going to hold a private memorial service and reading of the will on Friday at the Bellevue estate. He's inviting the board of directors, the bank managers, and the media to solidify his control. David looked at me, a dangerous grin spreading across his face. And you want to attend? I am the guest of honor, David, I said, my voice hardening into steel. I wouldn't miss my own funeral for the world. We are going back to Seattle, and we are bringing hell with us. Friday in Seattle brought a torrential downpour, the kind of heavy, relentless rain that matched the somber black umbrellas lining the sweeping driveway of my Bellevue estate. From the tinted back window of David's rented SUV, parked discreetly down the street, I watched the titans of my industry arrive to mourn me. There was Harrison Gable, the chief operating officer of the Surgical Robotics Division. There was Eleanor Hastings, the head of our primary banking syndicate. And there, shaking hands at the front door with a look of profound manufactured sorrow, was Simon Caldwell. He was playing the grieving air to perfection, dabbing his eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief as he ushered the board members inside. The local police are in position at the back gates, David murmured from the driver's seat, checking his encrypted phone. Noah just texted. Everyone is gathered in the main library. Simon is preparing to address the room. I looked down at my hands. They were wrapped in pristine white medical bandages, the only visible evidence of the hell I had survived. I had chosen my wardrobe carefully for this day, a sharply tailored, stark white Tom Ford suit. I was not a widow in mourning, and I was certainly not a ghost. I was the reckoning. Let's go, I said. David drove the SUV through the service entrance, bypassing the security detail Simon had hired. We entered the estate through the caterer's kitchen. The house was deathly quiet, all the staff having been dismissed for the private reading of the will. We walked silently down the long, marble-floored corridor toward the library. Through the heavy, mahogany double doors, I could hear Simon's voice echoing in the cavernous room. Margaret was a force of nature, he was saying, his tone dripping with practiced reverence. She built an empire from nothing, and her sudden loss in the tragic fire at Whispering Pines leaves a void that can never truly be filled. As her son-in-law, and now as the emergency trustee of the Sterling Foundation, I vow to honor her legacy. I have already initiated the restructuring protocols she and I discussed before her passing, to ensure the markets remain stable and the trust remains secure. Excuse me, Simon, came the gravelly, uncompromising voice of Noah Parker. Before we review the temporary injunctions, there is a matter of a superseding physical presence that nullifies your temporary power of attorney. Noah, please, Simon sighed, sounding patronizing. I know you are grieving, but the probate judge was very clear. The documents Margaret signed on Friday night give me immediate executive control. There is nothing to debate. I disagree, Noah replied dryly. David reached out and turned the brass handles of the library doors, pushing them wide open. The hinges groaned loudly. Every head in the room turned. There were 20 people seated around the massive antique conference table. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if all the oxygen had been vacuumed from the room. Harrison Gable dropped his silver pen. It clattered loudly against the wood. Simon was standing at the head of the table. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a wax mannequin. His jaw went slack, and his eyes bulged as they locked onto my white suit and then onto my bandaged hands. "Hello, Simon," I said, my voice ringing out clear and cold in the silent room. "I apologize for being late to my own funeral. The traffic on the I-90 bridge was simply murder." "Margaret?" Eleanor Hastings gasped, clutching her chest. My God, the news. The fire. A slight exaggeration by the press. "Eleanor, I said, walking slowly into the room. David stepped in right behind me, carrying a sleek silver briefcase, though it wasn't for lack of trying on my son-in-law's part. This is impossible, Simon stammered, stumbling backward until his hip hit the edge of the table. He was trembling violently. The suave, brioni-clad predator was unraveling before my eyes. You were in the house. I was, I confirmed, stopping at the opposite end of the table. And you locked the door. But you forgot about Richard's paranoia, Simon. You forgot about the fire-safe room in the basement. And more importantly, you forgot about the security cameras. Simon's knees buckled slightly. Cameras? He whispered, the word barely escaping his throat. David, if you please, I instructed. David placed the briefcase on the table, opened it, and connected a cable to the library's massive smart television screen mounted on the far wall. He didn't say a word. He just hit play. The high-definition, time-stamped footage from Whispering Pines filled the screen. The room watched in horrified silence as Simon Caldwell, the grieving heir, calmly poured 5 gallons of gasoline under my bedroom door. They heard the metallic click of the deadbolt. A collective gasp echoed through the library as the exterior footage showed Simon dragging my limp, drugged daughter out into the blizzard and tossing her into the SUV before lighting the match. When the video ended, the silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Simon's ragged, panicked breathing. That's a deep fake, Simon croaked, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. It's fabricated. She's trying to frame me to keep control of the money. The FBI Cyber Division is currently authenticating the raw satellite data, Mr. Caldwell, David said flatly. They seem quite convinced. As if on cue, the library doors opened again. 2 uniformed Bellevue police officers, accompanied by a plainclothes detective, stepped into the room. Simon Caldwell, the detective said, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. You are under arrest for the attempted murder of Margaret Sterling, the kidnapping of Chloe Caldwell, and first-degree arson. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. Simon didn't fight. The fight had been entirely drained out of him. He looked like a hollow shell as they clicked the cuffs around his wrists and read him his rights. As they marched him past me, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the floor, a broken man who had flown too close to the sun. Noah, I said, turning to my attorney as the police hauled Simon away. Freeze every account bearing his name. I want him relying on a public defender. Already done, Margaret. Noah smiled grimly. Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, I addressed the stunned board members. The Sterling Trust is secure, but I have a daughter to pick up. The drive to the private psychiatric clinic in North Seattle felt like the longest journey of my life. Armed with Noah Parker and a court order nullifying Simon's medical proxy, we bypassed the front desk and walked straight into the secure wing. When I pushed open the door to room 204, Chloe was sitting in a chair by the window, staring blankly at the rain. The sedatives were still heavy in her system, making her look pale and fragile. Chloe, I whispered. She turned her head slowly. When her eyes focused on me, a profound confusion washed over her face, followed instantly by a flood of tears. She tried to stand, but her legs betrayed her. I rushed across the room and caught her, wrapping my arms, bandaged hands, and all around my daughter and the grandchild growing inside her. Mom? She sobbed into my shoulder, her voice thick with drugs and disbelief. He told me you were gone. He said there was an accident. I'm here, my sweet girl, I murmured, stroking her hair as tears finally blurred my own vision. I'm right here, and he is never, ever going to hurt us again. Simon Caldwell is currently serving 2 consecutive life sentences in a federal penitentiary, his stolen wealth seized and returned. Chloe gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Richard, named after his grandfather. We live together now, raising him in the estate. The world thinks $5 billion makes you invincible, but true power isn't in the bank. It's the absolute, unbreakable will to survive the fire and protect your own.